The time has come, and man has reached the moon by overcoming the Earth's attraction and outer space. The history of Earth's civilization appeared on the moon with the names Archimedes and Lomonosov, Kurchatov and Maximala, Tsiolkovsky and Mendeleev. One of the largest craters on the back of the moon was called Kondratyuk by Soviet scientists. Hot. That name was also well known to American scientists who left the first people behind. In an interview with Life magazine reporter, one of the program's program managers, Apollo John, is both talking. When the early morning of March, the 1968th year served, it's full of heartbeats. I've been tracking the foam on the cape with the rest of the Tank 9. I was thinking about Russian at this point. Yuri Kondratyuk is. I've worked out more than the route that our 3 astronauts were supposed to be on. It's a condom. Who is he who was in the constellation of the most distinguished scientists on Earth? Yuri Vasilievich Kondratyuk is a very interesting man who, well before the first space flight, completed a book that Professor Vetsinky said was the most full table gas in spaceflight theory.
He was sure it could be done today. Trouble in those years was fantastic.
You couldn't even, you refused to understand yourself. Having received a copy of his book, we thought it would know when I really called him Don Quixote.
You know him?
Yes.
With a flight to the moon. The fact that nobody believed in it, almost everyone thinks it's fantastic. That's why. Too long before clinical, in turn, the road as far as it has been for years. Everyone laughed at him. We had sex. The first impression was when you first saw him.
The promo could have taken the Jeep. Yeah, his friends thought he was a weirdo and a donut, and a resemblance to a noble knight and a commitment to dream. Crazy dream, as they thought. Palpatine's backside gravitational. It's been years, his childhood and his youth. That's why he was born to a little plagiarist on the former street of Srethina. The father and mother died early, and the boy was raised by his grandparents and seemed to be no different from his peers. I read a lot, but not a Julie. Fern and Wells weren't interested in him. He found their novels unreal. The Kellerman Tunnel was the favorite book. She inspired his own desire to create an extraordinary project like Kellerman, a narrow ocean tunnel. My scientific and technical baggage consisted of an unfinished secondary education, plus a few unsystematic additions made by a self-sufficient man towards higher mathematics, physics, and the general theoretical foundations of technology, with a tendency to invent. Yuri Kondratyuk, with a silver medal, graduated from Poltava Gymnasium in the 1930s. A year later, he completed his first manuscript on space flights. He does not suspect that Tsiolkovsky's writings have already been written somewhere in Kaluga. He dares to set before himself the most difficult as a man to overcome the Earth's gravity on his way to the stars. How? From the gun. But in order to give the projectile space speed, you would have to build a barrel hundreds of miles long. What if the gun shoots guns so many times? The calculations quickly convinced us that the size of the initial weapon would be monstrous. The flying gun rotates back with a backslide and shoots backwards with small kernels, giving the barrel an additional acceleration. Better yet, by reducing the mass of kernels, you get an increasingly profitable mass of flying guns. So, ideally, shots should be blank. It's a rocket, isn't it? Later, Kondratyuk remembered irony. Having achieved the first positive results, I would have stayed on my laurels for a while, waiting to begin experiments while keeping my work in the strictest secret, as naively thought it would be sufficient to publish the basic principles found. As someone immediately possessed sufficient material resources, the Kondratyuk dreamed of an interplanetary flight, and the country took care of the agency. 20th year. Here at a small Cuban station, the old Kondratyuk used to work for him in the machinery. Today, the people of the station gave him a monument while he was the only one in the country. And the People's Museum is the only one so far. The fact is, it is here that the humble mechanic Yuri Kondratyuk has completed the main work of his life, a book on interplanetaries. He wrote, in the 1925th year, when the work was coming to an end and when I was able to track down the Sailing Gazette with a part of the work of Tsiolkovsky, I was somewhat disappointed that the basic provisions were open to me for a second time. But at the same time I was pleased to see that I had not only repeated previous studies, but had also made important new contributions to the theory of flight. The withdrawal of the largest aerodynamics specialist, Professor Wechinki, was a delight. This is undoubtedly the most complete study of interplanetary travel of all those written in Russian and foreign literature. The evening Moscow newspaper had already reported that the heads of science had decided to allocate funds for the publication. But that had been followed by numerous reviews and revisions of the money, which had been taken back. It took more than 2 years. The book never came out. At that time, Peter Kirillovich Gorkov, the head of the Siberian regional office, had invited a talented mechanic to build new Plevekas, who had played a major role in Kondratyuk's future life. Amazing fate. A man who knew how to fly to the moon had to build elevators, grain stores, and bread barns. And the moon. There was a shortage of materials in those years, and the condom is offering to use rubella to build a structure based on the principle of Russian embroidery without a single nail. For half a century now, woodwork has incomprehensibly contained the pressure of tons or tons of grain. It's a unique man-made monument to its maker of mechanics, as required by the inventor of calling. Here are the lines from his letter. I expect time and money for space experiments to be obtained from inventions in various fields, in particular by my own kind of work now in the field of cellular mechanics. So far, I've had my first successes in the form of a recent recognition of my new type of elevator. Common to the transporter's elevator among the specialists was known as Kondratyuk's cop. He's been making huge productivity gains. But interestingly, this invention served as a good service to all the world's space. Today the famous rugs are out of business. But then Yuri Vasiljevic won a big prize for her and spent all his money publishing his long-suffering essay. He called the book Conquering Interplanetary Spaces. Novosibirsk, Tijivin Street. That's the address he lived on. How happy I was that day, Yuri Vasiljevic. His work saw the light. Now it was what it was called, On a Horse. In the foreword, the author wrote, involuntarily asked why the task of interplanetary communications had not yet been resolved in practice. In fact, the task is not that difficult, and if you approach it scientifically, rather than with predisposed eyes of surprise and horror, you come to a conclusion.
Lack of influence and lack of understanding of the practical significance of this task.
Kondratyuk's book contained many bold and very practical ideas. Take at least its intended sequence of space exploration. First, test the action of the ray entry device. Then orbital flight around the Earth. It's an unstoppable flight to the moon. There's actually a flight around the moon. And finally, a flight to the moon with a stop. It is precisely these phases that have passed through humanity in the exploration of outer space. Here it is, the lunar soil brought to Earth by the Soviet station of the Moon, 16. Yuri Vasiljevic has proved that it is better not to start immediately to the Moon to disperse the ship in Earth orbit. He thought it was so important that he took the picture to the cover of the book. That's how the Soviets and the American spaceships start. In order to protect against overloading the missile, the conveyor offers a cross, lined to the shape of the cosmonaut. It also indicates the method of endurance tests for transshipments on centrifuges. Dear Konstantin Edwardovich,
Since I've determined the feasibility of getting out of the ground, it's been my goal.
One copy of Kondratyuk's book was sent to Tsiolkovsky. Here you go, followed by the answer of the great, of whom Janine, you are close to the target. But years were gone, and the dream of space remained a dream. Yuri Vasiljevic continued to build the elevators, then the wind, the power plants. The war caught a candy in Moscow. He immediately joined the militia. He didn't have to break up with his wife or his house. He just never had them. The creature was very lonely. Linked to the Gorchakov family, a selfless friendship, he was a faithful knight of Olga Nikolavna Gorchakov. His only letter from the front was saved. Don't worry about me, I cheated. Nothing's gonna happen to me, of course. Red Army of the 62nd Rifle Regiment Yuri Vasiljevic Kondratyuk. He died at the beginning of the war, heavy fighting under Moscow. If you set yourself the task of finding the place it occupies, the first explorers of outer space will come. I'm a performance for you. What no doubt next to the painting of Edwardovich Tsiolkovsky. I would like to point out that Yuri Vasiljevic Kondratyuk's works were not distracted, as most space scientists of that period did. They were practical. It is enough to recall the name of his first work to those who will read to build. And here in his book, published in Novosibirsk, he's clearly saying that it's just a technical project. The exploration of space. Indeed, his works are full of interesting, original, useful works. The ideas of proposals, which continue to be used today and will be used for a long time in the future. There's the parts of the device, the nozzle of the head, and the injector of the combustion chamber. There's the parts of the control system. For example, in advance of many decades of technological development, he proposed the use of floating and floating gyroscopes for management. The pattern of the missile is that only recent years have been, so to speak, sophisticated missile equipment, so missile issues are the same as missile construction. I wonder if I've come a long way, even though I've written a step-by-step statement in my writing. How should outer space be developed? At the same time, he concluded that the greatest value of space was now that a person would become, as he put it, the true master of the Earth by entering outer space.